Thank you. Let me just share a thought. As you guys know, I have 6 daughters. So the subject of equality in marriage is a big one. Today we start the lesson on money in marriage. I know it's just a really neat article that just came out in the Ensign it's this month. It's called Equality in Marriage, and they make some interesting points. And I just wanted to share a few of those. It says, the restored gospel of Jesus Christ proclaims the doctrine of equal partnership between men and women, here and in the eternities. Latter-day Saint theology teaches that gender difference does not superimpose the hierarchy between men and women. One gender does not have greater eternal possibilities than the other. As Elder Earl C. Tingey has said, you must not misinterpret what the Lord meant when Adam was told he was to have a helpmeet. A helpmeet is a companion suited to or equal to the other. They walk side by side, not one before or behind the other. A helpmeet results in absolute equal partnership between a husband and wife. How about the scripture? You know, there's another scripture in Genesis 3:16 that talks about Adam's to rule over his wife. And like Elder Bruce Haefman explained, Genesis 3:16 states that Adam is to rule over Eve, but this doesn't make Adam a dictator. Over and rule over uses the Hebrew bet, which means ruling with, not ruling over. The concept of interdependent equal partners is well grounded in the gospel of the restored gospel. So, of course, how about you hear that word presiding? So one final thought, it says, contrary to scripture and the teachings of Latter-day Prophets, some men and women have interpreted presiding to mean that after equal consent is not necessary because the presider or husband has the right of final say. Considering the equal partnership, Elder Perry said there is not a president or a vice president in a family. The couple works together eternally for the good of the family. They are on equal footing. They plan and organize the affairs of the family jointly and unanimously as they move forward. Interesting thoughts. Maybe it's because my wife and my kids are on a cruise and I'm here working that it's caused me to think a lot about this. And I remember I have a sister, and I grew up in California. Remember they had the Equal Rights Amendment. And my sister used to say, she says, why do we want to be equal when we're superior already? So, but it is important to understand the view that we have here on money and marriage is an important part. And so let's talk about what's due for this section. So your personal financial plan. For this section, it's actually pretty easy. All you'll do is just fill out Learning Tool 21. And what it does is just ask you a bunch of questions. How did your family handle the finances? If you can talk with this parent, that would be great. You don't have to. Sometimes it's painful, especially when parents feel they didn't do an adequate job. So how did they handle their finances? How did they teach you financial responsibility? How did they prepare for missions and educations? In our family, we had a walnut acre. My dad did construction, and he bought an acre and a half in the back. It was a walnut field, basically, and he took down the walnuts for about half of that. And then the second half, he just left the walnuts up, and that's what we did for our mission funds. Is every year we would go out and we would get those handles. They're like sledgehammers, but they had rubber heads on it, rubber mallets. And we would put the tarps around the trees, and we would get up there and we hit, and it was dirty and it was dusty, and there were bugs, and you'd hit those trees, and those bugs would fall down on you, and the spiders and things like this, and it wasn't the most exciting time. But that's what we did, and then we'd pick up the walnuts, and then we'd put them in bags, and then we'd take them to the hauler, and then we'd sell them, and that would go into our mission fund. And I remember those. And I remember one year that we did those, and it was dirty, and it was dusty, and it was hot. In Brentwood, California, where I grew up, it's sand. And we put them all into those burlap bags, and we put them on a pallet, and we put it out right at the front of the warehouse, and we were going to take them to the next day to the hauler and to sell them. And that night, someone came in and stole the whole pallet of walnuts. And I was madder than a hornet. I was so upset. And I couldn't understand why my dad was calm on things like this. And I think now as I get older, I realize that he just wasn't saving money for a mission. He was teaching his kids. And so, think about those stories. How will you handle finances in your family? How will you teach your children finance? How will you save for your kids' missions and education? Yes?
I was just going to tell a funny story about that as well. My mission president, his whole life, he had a big yard with white picket fence all around his yard. And every summer they would have to scrape the fence and whitewash the fence, his whole family together. And the last year that his last child moved out of the house, he just bought a white vinyl fence and put it in and said, I could have done this years ago, I just didn't want to because I want to teach my kids how to work the whole summer long. So.
Do you know what my family and I did on Saturday? We have teak furniture. Anyone know what you have to do with teak? You sand it down, you scrape it down, and then you put teak oil on it. And so we put our first of many coats of teak oil on our things. My kids, joke, the only reason you had 7 kids is free slave labor to, keep the yard clean. But it's important that we understand. We've all heard the jokes, and I try to be about money and marriage. I've got the same number of jokes for men as I do for women. A successful man who makes more money than his wife can spend. A successful woman is one who can find such a man. To be happy with a man, you must understand him a lot and love him a little. To be happy with a woman, you must love her a lot and try not to understand her at all. My wife teaches our kids, he says, what's yours is yours and what's his is yours. That's when you get married. A woman marries a man expecting he will change, but he does not. A man marries a woman expecting she won't change, but she does. There are 2 times when a man doesn't understand a woman. They are before marriage and after marriage. 2 things are necessary to keep one's wife happy. One is to let her think she is having her own way, and the other is to let her have it. A woman worries about the future till she gets a husband. A man never worries about the future till he gets a wife. And now here's the men ones. There's a difference between men and government bonds. Bonds mature. Before marriage, a man will lie awake all night thinking about something to say. After marriage, he will fall asleep before you finish. A married man should forget his mistakes. No use in 2 people remembering the same thing. Men with pierced ears are better prepared for marriage. They've experienced pain and bought jewelry. How many men does it take to change a roll of toilet paper? We don't know. It's never happened. A man is incomplete till he's married. After that, he's finished. I mean, we've all heard the jokes. And I'm trying to be equally bad on both sides. But marriage is such an important thing. I go home. Went home last night, my whole house is empty. My kids are my daughter was off with friends and all my other kids are down with my wife. And a home is not a home without a family. And it's important that we understand and the importance of this relationship. Let me start with a case. I got this email, and then I since asked the person who sent me an email if I could have permission to use it in class, and they said yes. What problems do you see and what recommendations would you make? Let's get in our groups and just make a couple of thoughts. And then what we're going to do after this, the end of today, we're going to respond to this email. How would you answer this email? Just take a minute. Does this seem like a pretty simple answer? Okay, let's go on to the second page. It sounds like we still have some thoughts here.
No, y'all did. That is not true in some cases.
Just out of curiosity, who do you think's writing this email, the husband or the wife? Let's come down to the second part of this here. Does it change with the second email? This will teach anyone to send me an email. I call this one, the husband's an explorer and the wife's a homesteader. Different types of mentalities. Let's go. Here's the second part of this. So what happened is I just got this email. And someone had requested the questions on this, and I had just started teaching this section. You know what they say, fools go where angels fear to tread. And, you know, in a business school teaching about money and relationships, I felt there was a need. So I sent her the presentation, something similar to what we have now. It's been since refined. And then she sends this back. How would you respond? And the question is what are the challenges with money and marriage? Why don't we get in our groups? And let's just think about what are the challenges between money and marriage. And so before we do that, I want to define a couple of things. What's the difference between doctrine, principles, and application? How would you define doctrine? Facts, truth. Okay. Here's what I think. I said, doctrine is truth about ourselves, our lives, our history, and our relationship with our Father in heaven and His Son, Jesus Christ. True doctrine is found in the Church of Jesus Christ. In its fullness, the gospel includes all the doctrines, principles, laws, ordinances, and covenants. Elder Packer said this, true doctrine understood changes attitudes and behavior. The study of the doctrines of the gospel will improve behavior quicker than a study of behavior will change behavior. But it's not just true doctrine, it's true doctrine understood. So how would you define then principles? Pardon me? Guidelines? Elder Pullman wrote this. He says, the gospel of Jesus Christ is a divine and perfect plan. It is composed of eternal, unchanging principles, laws, and ordinances, which are universally applicable to every individual, regardless of place, time, or circumstance. Gospel principles never change. And then how would you apply application? Because it's important that we understand doctrine understood, principles, and application. What you actually do. It's where the rubber meets the road. President Harold B. Lee said this. He says, all the principles and ordinances of the gospel are in a sense but invitations to learning the gospel by the practice of its teaching. No person knows the principle of tithing until he pays tithing. No one knows the principle of the word of wisdom until he keeps the word of wisdom. Children or grown-ups, for that matter, are not converted to tithing, the word of wisdom, keeping the Sabbath day holy, or prayer by hearing someone else talk about these principles. We learn the gospel by doing it. Okay. So let's think about this. Think about what are the challenges with money in marriage. And then I'd like you to think about what should the principles be. Okay, let's just spend a couple of minutes in your groups and let's just talk about that. And then let's add one point too. Let's do principles. And let's also do some applications. Let's do some recommendations too. Because what we want is give ideas that can make a difference in people's lives. Okay, take a couple of minutes.
Personally, the biggest issue, maybe not the biggest issue, but a large issue here, it seems like so I would say the principle would be like open communication, even after like continue talk about what expectations are.
Thank you. It's always just one of these.
The volume's beginning to trend down, so I think. So let's start. What are some of the recommendations? What are some of the principles and recommendations that can help? Steve and Scott.
When I drive home from work, sometimes I get real depressed because David Ramsey's on and I know I've been at work too long. And so I listen to him sometimes, and he always, when there's letters like this one, he always just rips into the spouse that's non-compliant, says they need to grow up. And, you know, like these are mature adults that need to become responsible as stewards, like you've taught in this class. Something we discussed in this group was, you know, sitting down with your spouse, if you have some like inconsistencies in your lifestyles or whatever, and to seek first knowledge where you can validate doctrine, right? And so like get books, get slides from this class, sit down with them, get them to understand, and then at that point use like future to displace the person from their decision. So like if you say, well, you can't go to Cafe Rio today, they're going to be like, oh, like it'll be a super emotional moment. But if you say, look, how about next month we only go to Cafe Rio twice? The fact that there's future allows the person to commit more and think more logically. And then once those principles are set, then you hold each other accountable, and it will be easier to live those principles.
A lot in that statement there. But I think what I has number one is seek knowledge and do it together.
Yeah.
Just because one has greater knowledge does not mean that that one gets to make all the decisions. What's the odds that I'm going to die before my wife? Good. For probably 85% chance. Does that indicate that my wife should know everything about the finances as well as I do? When we first started off, I didn't think my wife, and I hate to admit this, was doing as good a job on the checking account. And then so I took it over. And boy, after 3 weeks, I pleaded with her to take it back. I figured out she was doing quite a good job on that. And a lot of it is just the lack of understanding. And realize, he talked about the importance of this getting together once a week, this meeting. The most important thing is that you communicate. And so put together some time that you meet once a week where you talk about the finances and you talk about the budget and you talk about where you're going. I also think once a quarter, husband and wife should take off. Just the two of you for a weekend, or that's what my wife and I, we'll go up to Salt Lake, or we'll go up, you know, when the skiing is good, we'll go up and go skiing for a day. But we can talk, and we ski down, and on the slopes up, we'll talk about the kids, and we'll talk about what we're doing and things like this. You know, and then once a year, I think, you know, husbands and wife needs to get out and just by themselves. When I was a kid growing up, my parents, every year, 1 year they'd go to Hawaii and 1 year they'd go to Mexico. And I couldn't figure out why wouldn't they want to take us 6 kids along? you know, we're so much fun, and then I remember all the trouble we caused when they did take us 1 year. But, you know, and I didn't realize how important that was until when I was 18 years old and my mom passed away. And I was really thankful that my parents had that time together. So what do I do now is my wife and I figure once a year we'll go for a week, just the two of us. And is it bad on our kids? It's probably good on our kids. You know, they get to see the things that mom do. But that communication is really important. Other principles. Scott?
But this is, exactly what everybody's been talking about for the last couple of weeks with the equality thing. But, obviously mothers have different responsibilities. Mothers can have kids, fathers can have a priesthood. But it talks about right here, that fathers and mothers are obligated to help one another, equal partners. So, along with that slide you had, just because the guy makes the money doesn't mean he is the head decision maker. They need to make these decisions together.
And I think when I was in college, I memorized D&C 121, 34 to 46. No power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood or by virtue of money. Only by persuasion, by long suffering, by gentleness and meekness and love and faith, by kindness and pure knowledge, which shall greatly expand the soul without hypocrisy and without guile. So that's the way it is. Just because priesthood holders are not. There's no vice president. And president and vice president in a marriage, they're equal partners. And what I found is when we make decisions together, our decisions are always better. Other principles. Grant.
I don't know if it's a principle, but we just talked a lot about the importance of goal setting and being on the same page with short-term and long-term goals. It seems like a lot of the problems from that case that we just went over is they didn't seem like they really had any long-term goals, or they just weren't invested into their long-term goals. They didn't really have that future plan.
And it's so important that we help each other to accomplish the goals. I think I may have told the story where my wife, when she was 12, she was in the first city of Joseph pageant, actually in the St. Louis stake. And she says, I'd really like to be in some of those, some more of those church pageants. And as soon as she said that, I didn't know that. And so all of a sudden the light bulb went on and said, we're teaching here, let's start doing. And so we've been in the pageant, the Nauvoo pageant. In fact, I got a phone call yesterday. He says, well, we're just seeing when you're out there. My wife and I are on staff at the Nauvoo pageant. So we'll go out there, help them set up and things like that. But as I help my spouse accomplish her goal, it always helps me. Other principles.
Well, you've already said this, but this was the main thing that me and Ben were talking about was communication between the two spouses. I think people get angry or upset or frustrated when their expectations aren't necessarily aren't met in marriage and aren't met with what the other spouse's expectations are. And to correlate with that, the recommendation that we had is essentially in the dating phase, before you're married, and then obviously, like you've mentioned, continuing on through marriage, is communicate those expectations of what we're going to be doing with our money. Do we expect to save? I think probably lots of people during the dating phase, it's so awesome that you're not talking about, well, are we going to save 20% of our money every single month going forward? And I think it's important too. So.
Yeah, communicate expectations, talk. And one thing I learned, I don't know if I told the story about, we were in Washington, D.C., and we had an argument. And it was not a very good section of Washington, D.C., and I was madder than a hornet. So I said, stop the car. My wife was driving, and so she stopped the car, and I got out. I slammed that door, and I started walking. And then I realized where I was. And it was not the safest part. My wife, in her loving way, she drove a half mile down the road, and she stopped, and she figured by about a half a mile to a mile, I'd probably calm down. By then, I was calm enough to get back in the car. I still don't remember what we argued about. I do remember slamming the door. But you have to be together. If you're apart, you can't talk about these things. And I encourage you to, spend time at the temple. Spend time, doing the things that you should. Other principles. Let me just share a few thoughts that I had. And again, realize I'm not an expert. I'm not a marriage and family development person. I'm just a finance professor with lots of kids. My wife still likes me. We still have fun together. And ideas can be dangerous. Number one, we get this to work. Number one, delegate action but share responsibility. Sometimes it's not unusual for one to take a primary responsibility and one others. But you got to make sure that both are involved. Make sure both share the same knowledge. If you know more than your spouse, work together. Try to make it fun so your spouse can learn. Prepare family home evening lessons. We've got a lot of materials on the website to help. And it's not bad to switch responsibilities every year or so. Or in my case, it was 3 weeks. I lasted about 3 weeks. But it's important. Make sure you understand where all the assets and liabilities locate necessary backups, make sure each person knows where everything's are. Probably one of the most important things is just a list. Okay, we have these assets, they're at these places and these locations. Again, for men, there's probably an 85% chance that you will die before your spouse. Make sure that that's a good transition. You know what? Some decisions may be delegated, some must be agreed on beforehand. And my wife and I, what we had to do is anything more than $20 when we started out, except for groceries, had to be agreed on. So I'd get a phone call that says, you know what, I'm looking here at this shirt or something here that's $35. Is this okay? And you know what? And when I was down at Home Depot and I was looking at a tool, we need this tool for the grass. It's $26. Is it okay that I get it? And you know, and most of the time we would agree. And sometimes they'd say, you know, I'm not sure that's the best thing.
One thing that I've seen a friend do is they allow themselves like $10 a week. So they each have $40 a month they can spend whatever they want.
Yeah, and in our family, the wife always has about 3 times what the husband has. But that's okay. You know, again, teach your spouse, because once you're gone, your spouse will have to do it by themselves. Remember, we talked about die like you were living, and make that decision here. Number two is develop family goals. You know, and it's one of the cool things was having my wife take this class was she had to write down her 10 pages single space, what she wanted to accomplish. And it was really fun to sit down with her and to kind of go over it. She went over mine and I went over hers. And that was really fun because it put us on the same page. You know, write down your family goals. Opinions should be discussed fairly and openly without fear of ridicule. You know, that's our responsibilities to help and to make sure. And when you disagree, you've got to agree to disagree agreeably. I told you the story of the dog. I did not want a dog. You know, so we made the agreement, and she says, well, if the kids will all pay for it, if I don't have to touch the dog, I don't have to do, you know, anything with the dog, then you can get the dog. And so she filled all the parts of the agreement. Of course, my kids are all gone, and guess who took the dog out this morning? It was me. You know, and if you're concerned about partner spending, however you do it in a Christ-like manner. Again, D&C 121 I think is great advice to memorize. Number 3 is separate real from imagined problems. It's often too easy to put, money is such a tangible thing. You know, it's easy to put other things on that. I used to go to Asia for 3 weeks, and I'd come home and I'd find, there was the kids that have a new trike, or my kids that have, you know, pierced ears or something like this. And we got to realize that money is, because it's so tangible, we need to try to understand what are the real reasons behind it. You know, so be wise in that. And then there are some places that have pre-existing stress, and we all know what the buttons are. And so be wise. And so if we can have a certain time, it's Sunday at 8 o'clock that we sit down and talk, or it's Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning, that's when we sit and talk. But have a consistent time where you sit down and you talk. I think that's important. And then the last one is I think it's critical that you keep the romance alive. We've talked about going dates every week, and dates are a fixed, again, I used to think dates were a variable expense, but dates are now a fixed expense in our family. And going off once a quarter, you can do really inexpensive things. And then once a year going out. And it's fun. My wife, we're talking about what we're going to do this year, and she says, Bryan, remember, I like warm beaches. And so what she wants to do is she wants to go do some more scuba diving. But the point here is we spend that time together and to keep that relationship alive. And again, do I feel bad for my dad took my mom, once a year they went for a week? No, I'm really glad they did that. So it's important. What do you think research has shown about materialism and money in marriage? Do you think it helps? Does materialism help marriages and makes it stronger and helps them bring them closer together? No. So this is from an article called Materialism, Perceived Financial Problems and Marital Satisfaction. What does the topic tell you? So materialism has been defined as the importance a consumer attaches to worldly possessions and a person's interest in getting and spending. According to Riches and Dawson, there's 3 traits of individuals who subscribe to a materialistic ideology. 1, acquisition is the pursuit of happiness. So we got to continue getting more toys. 2, possession defines success. I'm only successful if I have lots of possession. And 3, acquisition centrality. So first, materialistic individuals tend to need possessions to be content in their life situation, therefore prefer to pursue happiness by acquiring and using possessions. Second, materialistic individuals tend to judge a person's success in life by the quantity and quality of their material possessions and financial assets. Thus, an individual with a materialistic orientation is more likely to attribute greater success to the neighbor who drives a luxury car than the neighbor who drives an economy car or rides a bicycle. Finally, materialistic individuals consider possessions to be a central aspect of their lives. That is, materialistic people tend to direct their thoughts and behaviors toward possessions or other pursuits over other pursuits such as personal relationships, social experiences, or intellectual enrichment. So what do you think the analysis confirmed? 3 points. 1, the higher levels of spousal materialism are associated with increased perceptions of financial problems, which in turn are negatively associated with levels of marital satisfaction. Number 2, analysis found that materialistic attitudes have a stronger impact on spouses' perception of financial problems than do levels of couple income. That's kind of unique. And 3, these findings support the notion that materialism contributes to how couples define and react to financial problems in their relationship. And these factors indirectly and directly affect general levels of marital satisfaction. So do we want to be happier in our marriage? Try to eliminate those materialistic expectations. Interesting. What do you think? Let's talk a bit about the principles. Let's go back to a few more principles. So these are kind of recommendations. What are the principles that we should follow? We talked about 1, couples are equal. What are some of the other principles that we should be concerned about? Yeah.
One of the things that was mentioned was the idea that the husband has a specific career that the wife doesn't necessarily approve of, or she wishes that maybe do something else. And I think it's pretty important that the husband and the wife both buy into the career that the husband has chosen.
Yeah.
And if not, if there's compromises made, usually on both sides to some extent.
I have a good friend who calls himself, he's the explorer and his wife is the homesteader. He likes to go out and start new businesses, and she likes that steady paycheck. And one of the things that they need to do is to do some type of compromise, make sure that the house is never one of the things that are put at risk should the business fail or things like that. And are there compromises that can be made? And the answer is yes. Maybe the husband feels he has certain God-given talents that he needs to use. Other principles. Let me just kind of go over these quickly. Sometimes we don't realize how powerful they are. Families ordained of God. That's our most important thing. Your spouse has priority. Isn't it interesting? Someone said, if you want to know what's important in life, think about those things that outlast it. Think about, and I like this. What's the judgment day, what's the first thing we're going to be asked? How is your relationship with your spouse? Have you actively been engaged in making them happy and their needs have been met? If that's our most important, if that's going to be the first question at the judgment day, you know what? Probably should we spend more time in that area here. Marriage partners are equal. We talked about that. You know, equal responsibility and equal say in financial matters. And it's really important that we ensure that. I like this here. If a marriage partner voluntarily removes himself or herself directly from family financial management, that is an abdication of necessary responsibility. What's Heavenly Father trying to teach us with financial management? Sacrifice, law of the harvest, communication, getting along, working together. All these great lessons. And yet if we don't contribute to that, we are missing some of the greatest blessings and some of the greatest growth opportunities that we can have. Seek the best interest of the family. I was dating a girl, and she was telling me about her older sister. And her older sister was married, and her brother-in-law was not working, and one day he came home with this. Actually, it was a used sports car, convertible. And the husband couldn't understand why the wife was so mad. You know? And he was thinking of his own interest instead of the best interest of the family. Behavioral problems, not money problems. You know, it's interesting. One of the apostles said, you know, earn $5, spend 6 misery. Earn $5, spend 4 happiness. Isn't it interesting, just the difference there? And it's just in the spending side. So I believe most of them are behavioral problems, not money problems. We all know the math. But it's how do we apply those things in our lives? Change is necessary. We've all heard that you can't change me. Can you change another person? No. You know, my wife's smart enough that she helps me to know what I need to do, and then she makes me feel that I'm loved so I can change. Even today, you know, I just sent her a text that says, okay, got up, ran, took the dog out, you'll be happy with me. And that's what we need to do. We need to realize that we all change. And change is just being better. We want to be better tomorrow than we were today. You know what? Just realize, you know, if you do what you've done in the past, you'll get what you've gotten in the past. So if you continue to spend instead of save, you'll live paycheck to paycheck. If you can borrow to support a lifestyle, pretty soon you'll get to a point where you can't. Tyler?
In preparation for graduation, we analyzed our finances from the top down, taking out tithing, 10% savings, and then we estimated 25% tax. That left us with our monthly living expenses. We took out all of our bills, etc.
Okay.
And then that told us how much we could spend on a home. So now we're looking for a home in that price range.
And
That's probably what I'm
yeah. And that's one of the smartest things, because you're buying a house based on your budget, not what the bank says you do. And the challenge is too many people don't do this. You know, and so it's so important that we do. And you know what? I can tell by that goal, you're continuing to save and invest wisely, so you'll probably accomplish the goals that you've set. Interesting, money spent on things you value leads to satisfaction and accomplishment. My brother bought this Ford truck. He says, well, the happiest day of his life was when he bought the truck. The second happiest day was when he sold the truck. And isn't it interesting? A lot of times people spend a lot of money trying to figure out what makes them happy. And so they're spending on a boat and a house and all of these things, trying to figure out what makes them happy. And the reality is if we can sit down and we can write our goals, then we already know what makes us happy, and so we don't have to spend on other things. If you know your goals, you'll spend on things that you value. If you don't, you'll scatter your resources and your time trying to determine what's important to you. And luckily, as you write down your personal goals in this class, you will have a good idea of what are the things that will make a difference. Financial freedom is more the result of decreased spending than increased income. And so, I'll let that go here. Spouses are to leave their parents and become one. You know, and that's important. And I'm sitting here trying to figure this out. I've got 2 married kids, and I'm trying to be real careful not to overimpose my bounds. But it is. And that also means leave the things your parents did and the things your parents did incorrectly. Steve?
It's kind of an unusual comment, but it might be helpful to somebody. It's just something that my wife and I do, and it makes us, like, because I'm partly materialistic. I try to curb it. But,
Just like the rest of us.
Yeah, exactly. And what we've found is, like, if we decide that we want something cool, like skis, like we bought skis this year, or like a new Mac computer that's grossly overpriced. What we've been doing is, like, and this sounds kind of funny, but, like, if you want nice things, you can do a lot of research and then get them used for really good prices. And things like these computers and things, like, I often trade them up. Like, I'll look on Craigslist and I'll buy a new one and then sell that and make a little bit more money. And then my wife won't let me get a new one unless I pay for it with gains from, like, selling other ones. And then, like, we bought road bikes, and I got mine for, like, half off, and I know that I can sell it for more than I bought it for. And so we buy things, and, like, we're about to move to California, so we're going to sell our skis for more than we paid for it. So my point is, like, there's, like, a way that you can manage having nice things if you know, like, and you do the research and know that they hold their value, and then just understand these, like, side markets like KSL. We've all been on these websites and everything. But if you just do it smart, I mean, we're probably going to make money buying skis and buying bikes. Like, does that make sense? And so you can do things like that, but it is extremely irresponsible if it's out of your budget, of course, to go out and buy, like, a brand new Bianchi, like, road bike that's like $5,000, and then it's on a credit card. Like, that's irresponsible, but you can still do things without, breaking the bank.
And I like the point here is his wife says, well, as soon as you make up enough money here by your selling other things, then you can buy it. So the point here is it's not that you can't buy it, but you have to do it responsibly. Now, I'm jealous because I'm not very good at selling things. But I do, what do I like? I like Craftsman tools. And I still have Craftsman tools when I bought one, when I was 17 years old, because my dad said I had to have my own tools. But there are certain things that we like. And if we can do it responsibly, if we can pay cash for them, if we can make sure we're not impinging on the other goals, our savings goal and things like that, then it's okay. Other comments? My son-in-law wanted to get a truck, and my daughter said, okay, well, once you save this amount of money, so you can pay cash for it, then you can do it. And so it took him 14 months or 15 months to be able to do that, and then he was able to do that. And then the most important thing is to realize the best things in life are free. You're not going to take your car or your house. You're not going to take anything when you die. And I couldn't understand why my dad says, Brian, the most important things to me are my kids. And now as I get older and I've got grandkids, then I think I understand. So let me ask a question. What do you think, we talked about the principle, equal partnership in marriage. What do you think the results show? What do you think the social research has shown about equal partnerships? Does that make for happier marriages or less happy marriages?
Very happy.
So here's 4 different studies. Number 1, equal partners are more satisfied and have better overall marital quality than couples where one spouse dominates. And it's interesting, too, there's a lot of cultures that say, okay, the male dominates. There's a lot of cultures where the female is almost property. And those cultures are wrong. Number 2, equal partner relationships have less negative interaction and more positive interactions. 3, equal partners are more satisfied with the quality of the physical intimacy in their relationships. And then how does it help with the kids? Parents with high relationship equality are more likely to work together as a team in parenting their children. And the benefits of partnership to marital relationships and parenting practices create a healthier environment for children, making them less susceptible to depression, anxiety, drug abuse, and delinquency. So we see that as we follow the principles, it's not only beneficial to us as parents, but it's beneficial to our kids as well. So let's go back to that case study. So how would you respond now to this? Are these pretty sophisticated people, or is the writer pretty articulate? Yeah. You know, very articulate, and they made sure that I knew that they had a degree in marriage and family, you know, whatever it was, School of Family, something like that. And she had taken the personal finance classes there. But just is knowledge enough? So what would you recommend?
One thing that's been kind of really good, my wife and I have kind of been sitting down recently and putting together a family charter kind of thing.
Family charter.
So not only are we talking financial goals, but just our general expectations and kind of where we see us going, you know, in the next, you know, rest of our lives pretty much, and the way we want to raise our kids and things. And so, you know, I'll get excited when we talk about financial goals, and my wife will get excited when we talk about, you know, how we're going to raise the kids and things like that.
And that's okay.
And it's a lot of fun. It's been really fun to put that together. It's a lot of really good discussion on it. And it's been helpful.
Other thoughts? I think one of the things we need to look at is how do we perceive our spouse? Was it C.S. Lewis? He said if we saw people as they truly are, he said we would bow down to worship them. They are, you know, because basically gods and goddesses. Do we see our spouses as Heavenly Father sees them? As kings and queens, as priests and priestesses? Do we see them not as they are now, but as they can become as well? You know, the interesting thing here about this email question is, why would she write me? I'm nobody. You know, I'm just a teacher. What was she feeling frustration about in the marriage? Yeah. So she's kind of appealing supposedly to a higher authority, although I'm not a higher authority. But it says that the communication has broken down. So marriage partners equal, it doesn't seem like it. So the writer's appealing to me to support what they think is correct. So communication is broken down. Number 2, control of money is power. Does that seem like a thing here? You know, I was talking with another professor here, and he's a bishop in a ward, and he was talking about how they had the same problem. The one spouse has got control of the thing and kind of divvies the money out to the other spouse. You tell me what you need and I'll give it to you, like he's the dad and she's the child. I told him this should be easy. Just flip it around. Now the other spouse gets the checkbook and they get to, you know, dole the money out as they think it's appropriate. And all of a sudden you put it on the other foot and you get a different story. Best interest. In this case, does it seem like both are seeking the best interests of the family? And I believe that family interests need to be put first. Behavioral problems. You know, again, is it really a finance issue? Is it a question of dollars, or is it a question of how we handle it and how we handle our relationship with other people? Change. And I'm realize too, as a professor, I'm trying to make points, and I don't really know all of these issues. I'm trying to do the best job I can with what I can read into it. I haven't sat down with this couple. I don't know either of the situations, but I know enough that what has come across my desk, and as we've kind of talked. respect, sophisticated versus saving versus spending. And then leave parents. You know, one of the things, two important points that I found in my marriage that's really helped out is, number one, the story of getting out of the car. If you're not in the same place, you can't talk. And so it's so important that we meet. And number two is I found that if I always assume my spouse is trying to do the best job they can based on the knowledge they have, they're trying to do the best they can, then it always puts us in a better position to make better decisions. In my case, we've always found that we always make better decisions together than we do individually. And so some of my worst decisions are when I made it without her consent. And research has kind of found that same thing. You know, they talked about leaders who like to jump and who make all these decisions first. They always need to have someone back to kind of bring them back to reality and things like that. And so it's so important that you have someone there to talk about. Recommendations. So what recommendations would you have for this couple? And we'll be done. Phoebe, what recommendations would you have? Do you know people who are in similar situations?
Off the top of my head.
Okay.
But, I recommend, it seems like the person needs to communicate their issues and sit down and make sure their frustrations that
Yeah.
communicated is followed.
Has this been a long-term problem or a short-term problem?
It seems like it's been
Going on for a long time.
And I was gonna say, I feel like something that's been brought up, but I feel like they're just not following any goals, and if they do have goals, they're not committed to them. They just need to reevaluate those goals.
Reevaluate the goals.
And commit them together, I guess. I think that would help.
Okay. Including the goals to go to the temple and family scripture study and family prayer and all of these things. I find that just those basics there helps us to be in a point where we can listen to the promptings of the Spirit. And you can't change someone else, but you can provide an environment where people will want to change, and where the Spirit's there, people will change. Other recommendations?
In this class, we've pretty much everything we've taught has been based on what prophets and apostles have said. Well, maybe not everything, but there's tons of quotes from them. And I'm sure this would depend on their relationship, but if she felt like she had the prophets and apostles on her side saying you need to save up your money, you need a budget, then maybe a family home evening list, it can include a lot of those kinds of talks and things like that to help show these are principles that we should follow.
So what that says is if one spouse has more knowledge, then they need to help the other spouse to learn. Just like as parents, we need to help our children to learn. We need to be wise on those things. And that's what we'll talk about on Thursday. Other recommendations?
Just one other thing. I think you just brought it up, but it's like you gotta know why they're thinking.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of reasons.
Yeah, you got to know why they're thinking what they're thinking.
Derail everything. Or
Yeah.
trying to keep everything going.
Yeah. So you have to talk. You have to listen, and then you understand it. And
Another thing, and this is something I'm learning. I just got married a few months ago, but
expert.
yeah. We both come from different families who did finances in a very different way, and so you have to be very careful when you talk about how you should do finances, because if I say, oh, this is how it should be done, she's like, well, my parents did it differently. Are you saying my parents are wrong? Or if she says this is how it should be done, it's like, oh, well, my parents did it differently. Are my parents wrong? And so it's very careful of how you say it. Not this is how it should be, but maybe I would like to do it like this. What do you think about that? And so you're coming into more of an agreement than this is how it should be.
Right. So if you say this is how it should be, are you the president and she's the vice president? Yeah. But if you say this is how it was done in my family and this is let's talk, how was it done in yours? All of a sudden you're equal partners again. And the reality is it doesn't matter how your parents did it or how your spouse's parents did it. What matters is how you guys did it. And if you make the decisions together that this is what we're going to do, that's the important thing. Does it really matter what parents on either side think about? Is Heavenly Father going to at the judgment day, is he going to be concerned, well, what did your parents think of you and your decisions? Or what did your spouse think of you and your decisions? Other?
I wonder what people would have to say with the talent trying to do his own thing. Just because I could see, my wife she likes the foundation, she probably prefers a steady paycheck. And if I ever wanted to not provide that, like how you would go about working that out. I don't know if anybody's been exposed to like a brother or a father or somebody who's like stopped working at this firm to like start a company and how that family did. Like how do you negotiate that? That seems like something that will be hard for me in the future if I ever decide.
And in my case, I did 2 startup firms. And a lot of it is just communication. You know what? We got a paycheck here. We've got 6 months of earnings. You know, my first firm after college was, we've got 6 months of earnings. If we can get the company going by then, we'll be doing good. If not, then in 6 months we're going to be looking for a job again. And the second company was, okay, we'll have a base salary which was barely enough to live on, and you'll have a bonus the first year. You've got a guaranteed base for 3 years. After that, if it doesn't work, then we'll shake hands and walk away. Are we willing to take that risk? And the key thing here is, you know what, do you have that relationship going? I find my wife has a little block of wood that says, if mom ain't happy, then no one's happy. And there's a lot of truth to that. If our spouses aren't happy. And so we need to realize that. The most important thing is not my job. The job is nice because it allows me to have the resources to do what I want. But the most important thing is that relationship. Do you think Heavenly Father's going to care about how much money, where we worked and what company we work for, or the job that we work for? Or is he going to be concerned about what kind of relationship we have with our spouse? And I think it's the latter. Other thoughts, other recommendations? Yeah.
I think in these situations it's always interesting because it seems like it's pretty, I don't know, it's a little bit biased. Like, I know what I'm talking about, the other person doesn't really know what they're talking about. Like, what would you expect me to do? So I think just trying to be open-minded. And
be open-minded.
You know, maybe you're not as good at managing money as you think you are. That's some of the sort of that you shared about, like, let me be in charge of things.
Yeah.
Like, run my money and do it.
Yeah.
So I guess just talking about it and then having, like we heard, all these suggestions are really good and thinking in the long term,
Yeah.
as opposed to short term.
Thinking in the long term, I like that. There's a scripture that says, let the solemnities of eternity rest on your mind. You know, if we thought about that as we were in our relationship with our spouses, I think we would make much better decisions. Thanks, Chase. So let's just kind of well, I think we've handled that one. So let's just do this last case. So Bill's your best friend. Got engaged. He's concerned as his parents, as in his parents' marriage, money was a divisive issue. Discuss what you consider the most pressing issues. If you had to answer this, you could only answer 3 issues. What would those 3 issues be? What advice would you give? I realize you're being videotaped. Elliot.
What your long-term goals are.
Okay, what your long-term goals are.
Who will take responsibility for what aspect of the bills.
Okay. Who will take responsibility for what aspect of your finances?
And how much you're going to save each month.
Okay, and how much you're going to save each month. Someone else want to come up with their 3? Nicole.
Well, I just think maybe adding to that, I think budget is huge because
Okay.
I think like that's like this
almost like a small thing, but it has long-term consequences.
Yeah.
And so if you decide on that little thing, it's sticking to a budget.
To decide on that little thing to stick to a budget. That is probably the single most important goal to help you accomplish your other goals, is will you stick to that budget. And realize that once you see me after this class here, you'll see me and say, Brother Sudweeks, and I'll ask you 2 questions. Are you living on a budget and are you saving 20%? Because if you're doing those 2 things, I found that you will probably be accomplishing your other goals as well. Other thoughts? Other suggestions here for this newly soon-to-be married couple? Grant?
Maybe deciding when and how often you want to communicate.
Yeah,
your goals
deciding
with
when
your kids.
and how often, and I recommend every week.
Kind of realigning yourself and
Yeah.
making sure you're at the checkpoint each
Yeah.
week, period, or however you want it is.
Make sure you're realigning yourself. Let's have one more final comment. Skylar, what would your advice be?
I would set up just kind of standards and principles you want to live by, like finance related. We're going to save this month.
State the principles you're going to live by.
Yeah, your budget and all that stuff. Just, this is what we're going to do always. That way you don't really have to fight about it or talk about it because you already know what the standards are. You just have to then live by them.
And for you in this class, I'd recommend you do that. I'd recommend you sit down with your spouses and let them write their goals. It's fun with my wife and I to kind of sit and talk about our goals and kind of compare them. And I find that I'm moving more in the direction of her goals and she's moving more in the direction of mine. But it's so important. So let's just kind of summarize what we've talked about today. We talked about what are the principles of money and marriage. We started with doctrine, principles, and applications. It's not enough to understand the doctrine. We need to understand the principles, and then we need to be able to apply it in our lives. Doctrine, the truth about ourselves and our relationship. Principles, those unchanging parts of the gospel. And application, it's really the living. We talked about the principles of money and marriage. You know, the family's ordained of God. Marriage partners are equal. Your spouse is priority. You know, if we follow those principles, then we will make our decisions correctly. We talked about why money may be an issue in marriage. You know, it could be lack of financial knowledge, a lack of communication, differences in family personality types. We were brought up differently, lack of shared goals. And we made some recommendations. We recommended, you know, delegate action but share responsibility. There is no president and vice president in a marriage. There is no, Eve was not a lesser person because she partook of the fruit. That's a mistake. Women are equal in all things. Help meet means a help equal to. Rule over means to rule with. Delegate action but share responsibility. Develop family goals as a couple. Separate real from imagined problems. And probably the most important is just keep the romance alive. You know, so interesting stuff. Again, as my wife and kids are at the home, I walk home to an empty house. And even though the house is paid for and things like that, it's still an empty house. And it helps me to realize how important they are and realize how important it is to my life. But, you know, we celebrate our 29th year of marriage 2 weeks ago. So I'm amazed my wife has put up with me for that long. But I'm so thankful that she does, and I'm thankful for the principles that have made a difference. Because if we can follow the principles, if we can follow the things that we've talked about, it can make such a big difference in our lives. Questions? Okay, thanks everyone.